What up, everybody? I'm Max Lugavere, and on this next episode of Ever Forward Radio, me and my man here, we're going to talk about how to make your brain healthier and body stronger.
3, 2, 1.
Well, dude, Max, welcome back, man.
Thanks for having me.
Pleasure to be here. I was catching up on our last conversation quite literally three years ago. Can I do math good? April 2018.
Wow, that was like ancient history.
Right on the cusp of the first book. And now here we are with number 3.
Amazing. Yeah, you were an early adopter, so thank you for that. That was probably a month after Genius Foods, my first book, came out. I had yet to launch a podcast. But I was, just super, at that point, grateful that my book had done as well as it did, and that I was able to, that I seemingly was able to impact all the people that I had set out to impact, with the publication of Genius Foods.
I mean, impact is a big key word there. And I know we kind of touched on it the first time, and I'm going to link all that for everybody. If you want to catch the premise of what you're all about, definitely go read that book, check out that episode. But I remember having a much greater appreciation for your work because of why you did it, with the unfortunate loss of your mom. And that was such like a spot on thing for me as well, because the whole reason I'm doing what I'm doing here was the death of my father. And so like that was very meaningful. So I just want to like acknowledge like the meaning you have behind your work again.
Thank you, brother. Yeah, it's hard when you have a sick loved one, the world stops. And that's what happened to me with my mom. She, at a young age, in the prime of her life, really developed this rare form of dementia, which I had no prior family history of any kind of neurodegenerative disease. And when she started to complain of brain fog and she had a change to her gait, her movement, it left me and my brothers and my dad. My parents had been separated, but we were all scratching our heads. And so because I'd been so close to my mom, I'm the oldest in a family, a tiny family of 3 boys. So, the oldest child tends to have a pretty solid relationship with their mother. And so I took it upon myself to go with my mom to different doctor's visits. And what I experienced in every instance I've come to call diagnose and adios, because her symptom presentation was atypical. It wasn't Alzheimer's disease, but it was some other.
Not then yet, at least.
Not.
Right? Yeah.
It didn't. It was a form of dementia called Lewy body dementia, which feels like having Alzheimer's disease and Parkinson's at the same time.
Wow.
But it's rare. So about 1 in 5 dementia cases is attributable to Lewy body dementia. The vast majority of dementia cases are due to Alzheimer's disease dementia. But regardless of the variant that you have, typically they prescribe the same drugs, which are minimally effective. They have no disease modifying ability. And so that was my call to action, to try to understand to the best of my ability what else was out there, both in terms of treatment for my mom from a more holistic perspective, but then also because I recognized that I now had a risk factor myself, right? My mom, what could be done to prevent this from ever happening to me and others that I care about? So that began the journey, and that's what is encapsulated in Genius Foods, which is sort of a nutritional care manual for the human brain. And all my work is really motivated by that. Is my why. My mom, the fact that my mom, her health was so tragic and she passed away 3 years ago. But trying to get to the bottom of what it was about her diet, her lifestyle that may have pulled the trigger on those conditions really is like I think my life's purpose.
I'm with you. And the loss of my father was and still is a big driving force behind why I'm so health conscious. It was always top of mind for me before, but now I know the reason my father passed away is not hereditary. It was a, freak terminal illness, ALS, neurological, autoimmune, nonetheless. But it was enough of a scare for me to really pay attention, develop a sense of awareness of what I was doing that was serving my mind, my body, my health. But it's like, damn, like I don't want to go down that path. Whatever I can do to serve that, I want to do. And so much so as a part of my daily rituals and a part of your daily rituals. And so I'm curious now with your new book, Genius Kitchen, what is so much different about this now? Are we taking like a peel behind the curtain into a day in the life of Max in the kitchen, like these things that actually have served you over the years? Like, what's the difference?
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, so one of the things that happened when my mom got sick, first I moved to New York from LA. So I kind of gave up my LA life. And one of my favorite things to do with my mom was to cook with her. It was like a way that we'd bond, and she would always cook for the family. Eating together as a family was one of the things, one of her many values that I think led to the fact that my family is so strong. Me and my brothers are best friends, and I'm so close to my dad. I'm so close to my mom. In part, I think because my mom was so adamant about us, breaking bread together. No pun intended. Every night.
At the table.
Yeah, being at the table together, and my mom was a busy woman. She ran a business with my dad, which is another one of the reasons why her dementia was just so hard to witness. But whenever she could, she would cook for me and my brothers. And when she got sick, I began to take that responsibility on myself, because she was no longer really able to, her activity in the kitchen ceased to be safe at a certain point.
Sure. Yeah. So you kind of had to pick up the torch a little bit.
Yeah. And so I kind of, as a burgeoning chef, I had to learn on the job. And if the food that I was cooking wasn't going to be good, my family wasn't going to enjoy it. My mom certainly wasn't going to eat it. My mom is not somebody like, I feel like when you're in the health and wellness world, and it's a passion of yours, you get used to sometimes eating things that aren't, deliciousness kind of takes a back seat sometimes.
It's a little bit of sacrifice for the the means.
100%. Yeah. So, I mean, that's kind of how I eat, but that's not how others eat.
Yeah.
So making food delicious is something that's really important, and that I had to get good at if I was going to take up this role and feed and, cook meals for my brother and my mom. But at the same time, I wanted to do it with all healthy ingredients, all the quote unquote genius foods that I had been learning about and preaching about over the years. So started to cook, and it was just this amazing thing where I actually took to it, and, I learned all of these incredible methods, and even cooking basic items like a steak or a burger. It's not something that's all that intuitive, and something that, foods that actually most people screw up. So, So, I went down that rabbit hole, and so Genius Kitchen is really about, it's a cookbook. So it's packed with delicious, simple to prepare recipes using highly accessible, low cost, nutrient dense foods. So again, these are the genius foods. These are the foods that I've identified at most supermarkets, going to be most available, no matter where in the world you happen to be, that are going to provide the most bang for your buck in terms of the nutrients that can protect and support optimal brain health and brain function, right? But they're easy to prepare recipes. And then the book is also in tandem with that. It's a wellness guide. So it's a kitchen wellness guide. Breaks apart each food category and tells you what to buy and why, what to steer away from.
So like an understanding of here are the ingredients, here's the recipe, here's the end result, but also like why these are all coupled together.
Yeah. It's not just a cookbook. It's sort of like a 2-in-1 book, in the sense that it's a way to reduce your exposure to foodborne toxicants, which are now ever present in the modern food supply. It talks about how to optimize your digestion, because if you're spending all this money on healthy food, but you're not digesting it properly, or you're not, maybe your microbiome, your oral microbiome, for example, isn't set up to extract the nutrition from the food the way it should be. It talks about how to basically optimize all that stuff so that you're getting the most bang for your buck, and you're really reaping the full breadth of nutritional benefits that you ought to be able to derive from your food.
I got a question for you. I want to kind of put you on the spot here. I want to walk you through my kitchen. Let's see if I meet the genius criteria.
Let's do it. Yeah.
So just today, for example, started off my day, like most mornings I'm going to train. I usually work out around between 9 and 9:30. Bunch of water first thing in the morning, good purified water. And then I use a Super Greens micronutrient powder. And then about an hour 15 after I wake up, I'm having half a serving of coffee, organic coffee, with some MCT, some collagen. I also throw in, like on a training day, I'll add cordyceps mushrooms, and a CBD honey flavor mix just for the flavor. What's that Genius Kitchen rating?
Well, so far you mentioned that you purify your water. So are you using a reverse osmosis purifier? That's what I'm assuming based on the word purify.
Good catch. I'm using just a filter that I researched and I liked, to be honest.
Okay.
It sits outside of my kitchen.
Yeah. So like an activated carbon filter or something.
Yes. Yeah. Activated charcoal.
So that's cool. Activated charcoal. Yeah. So that's great. I would typically add some electrolytes to the water. You don't need to, and especially if you're not purifying the water, if you're just filtering it, then that's fine because water tends to have natural electrolytes in it. Reverse osmosis water purification basically depletes the water of everything, both good and bad. So that's when you definitely want to add minerals back into your water. Although that's a little bit of a controversial statement because typically.
So there's controversy when it comes to wellness advice?
There is. Yeah. Well, so the controversy is whether or not you actually should remineralize water that you purify with reverse osmosis technology. And that's the idea is that water is it contains electrolytes, whether you get it from the tap or spring water. It contains metals that act like electrolytes in your body: sodium, potassium, calcium, magnesium. Yeah. When you run water through a reverse osmosis purifier, you're getting rid of everything, including the electrolytes.
It's like too pure.
Yeah, it's almost too pure. Are there any potential consequences of that? Likely no. And you get a lot more minerals from your food, but still, it's pretty unnatural to get water that's that pure. It's basically like distilled water. You don't want to really be drinking distilled water.
Ideally, it would be going to a fresh mountain spring kind of thing, getting all those essential vitamins and minerals.
Yeah. So moving on to the rest of your day, you're drinking coffee. I think coffee is great, depending on the time of day that you consume it, the dose of caffeine. I do routine hiatuses from caffeine and coffee, which
like a little caffeine reset.
Reset, yeah, which I find a lot of value in actually. But right now I'm back on caffeine. I do about 2 tablespoons of ground, so that's probably like less than 100 milligrams of caffeine in total.
I'm always watching my milligrams and time. Like I won't consume a high day for me is rare. It's like 300 milligrams. Usually I'm 200. Around 200, and I won't consume. Ideally, I aim for 12 p.m. But if I'm feeling crazy, it might be like 2 p.m.
Yeah. I'll do that too sometimes, and also like my afternoon drink tends to be sometimes like maybe I'll have like a shot of espresso or something, which is actually like, even though it's very concentrated, it's not more caffeine than a cup of coffee.
Yeah.
Just because the volume is less. So yeah, I mean, caffeine I think is great. It's an ergogenic compound. It helps with ketone generation. It can stimulate AMPK and all other sorts of pathways. What is that other one? The NRF2 pathway coffee's been shown to stimulate, which is like an antioxidant detox pathway. So coffee's got all these amazing like attributes to it.
Yeah.
So it's easy to say coffee is just this across the board healthful beverage, but everybody's different and everybody has different tolerances for caffeine. If you're prone to anxiety, caffeine is something that you probably want to minimize your consumption of, but yeah, I'm a fan of it. And then, so after all that, then you go work out.
Yeah. So in the coffee, on a training day, I'm adding cordyceps mushrooms, some MCT oil, coconut water extract, L-theanine. It's all in this mix.
That's awesome.
So, I go like a half scoop because I know I usually am going to have a second cup later, so I don't want to overdo with the caffeine in milligrams, but I love the cordyceps for the energy, for the recovery, the vasodilation, the oxygenation of the blood, all the things during I can feel. And then, a little bit of the brain health stuff, which I know is right up your alley, the MCTs, even I guess you make an argument for L-theanine as well, but really just trying to fuel my body, my gut, my brain from the start without just stimulating it like crazy,
Yeah. And I think the MCT oil is, one of the reasons why I think it's useful in that context is that it slows the infusion of caffeine.
Exactly. Yeah.
It slows any kind of fat in the stomach is going to slow gastric emptying, the transition of contents from the stomach to the small intestine. So
very politically correct said.
yeah. So I think that makes sense.
Yeah.
And then you work out typically like a resistance training,
strength training oriented. Yeah.
Nice. Yeah. That's pretty much what I do. I enjoy a fasted workout. I feel like my hormones, my neurotransmitters are aligned in the morning in a way that gives me a lot of subjective energy in the gym.
Purely fasted, just maybe some water or some electrolytes.
Well, if you think about it, to me, there's something really ancient about that, like working physically for your food.
Very true.
Because a hunter-gatherer would want to conserve their energy. And the only time that they would hunter-gatherers don't exercise for fun, right?
Yeah, they're thinking they're preloading, like carb loading for their hunt. Like they don't have that luxury.
No, yeah, they're hunting so that they can procure food, right? And so that to me is something like that. It makes a lot of sense from the ancestral lens that you work out in the gym, you're earning your food. You don't want to feel like that's not, you don't want to have a relationship with food where you feel like you're constantly having to earn your food,
Sure.
but from a warrior standpoint, like, that's sort of like a fun way to think about it.
Yeah, I can get on board with that. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Where do you see I know this is kind of a broad statement, where do you see in kitchens in America right now, where are we doing it right? And where do we have the most room for growth? Typical standard American kitchen.
Yeah, that's such a good question. I mean, to be honest, I think that if you're cooking at home, you're so like, you've got such an upper hand in terms of your health and overall wellness. I was actually, yeah, I mean, I did a post today on Instagram about how, just cooking at home and eating out less is associated with a healthier BMI. So body mass index, which it's not a great diagnostic tool, but it is an important screening tool generally. Higher BMIs tend to be associated with obesity and overweight at the population level. It's also, but it also is associated with having a healthier body fat percentage. So there's that. Improve family dynamics. We know that eating at home, you can prepare the same meal that you get out at a restaurant. It's going to have less fat, typically less sodium. So it tends to be healthier, like just eating home. So just off the bat, like not even talking about what it is that you're actually making, there's a benefit to that. Still, most Americans overconsume what are called ultra processed foods. About 60% of the calories that Americans consume today come from packaged, processed, shelf stable convenience foods. These are like the boxed mac and cheese or the frozen chicken dishes or, what have you.
The convenience factor foods.
The convenience factor foods. Yeah. So I would say that, still a lot of Americans are relying on those kinds of foods that we're better off minimizing. And cooking foods from scratch, single ingredient foods. Real foods, whole foods don't have extensive ingredients lists. They are the ingredients.
Carrot.
Yeah, carrot.
Chicken.
Fish, chicken, beef, spices, herbs. I love to cook with spices, herbs, because as opposed to sauces can add a ton of calories. Herbs and spices add virtually 0 calories. And people who eat spicy food tend to have reduced risk of early mortality by about 14%.
Yeah, great anti-inflammatories, coagulants in some aspects, so if you got that ulcer, maybe add some cayenne, a lot of different things.
Yeah, I mean, spices are packed. I mean, they're the taste that they provide in such a small package is due usually to a higher concentration of these bioactive phytochemicals that have a health promoting effect. And all herbs, all spices are beneficial, probably in some way. The majority of we haven't studied all of the hundreds of spices that are used around the world in rigorous detail, the way that we've studied just a few of them. But, for example, curcumin and turmeric, or
especially together.
Yeah.
Some black pepper.
With some black pepper, piperine and black pepper, for example, or cinnamon has been shown to have an anti-hyperglycemic effect. So we've done like a number of really good. We've done a lot of research on like a small handful of these spices, but in general, like the spicier the food, and I don't mean like spicy in the sense that it burns your tongue, but using more herbs and spices, great from a health standpoint.
Let's maybe let's go down. I'll say maybe a potentially controversial area. What you're talking about, love controversy. What you're talking about, my understanding of your work and what I pulled from it over the years is that we're really aiming mostly for longevity, things that are going to support the body, support homeostasis, and really a thriving state beyond just, maintenance kind of thing. But people, especially in the kitchen, when they're looking for what to cook, what do I want to eat, is more than that. I think some people have very specific goals of what they're after, particularly with like body composition.
Yeah.
And I think maybe it's getting better. I believe it is getting better, but there's kind of been a line in the sand of how we should eat for longevity, for wellness, for the average human versus what actually is going to maybe build strength, get me shredded, lose body fat. Like, how do you navigate that line?
I mean, to me, it's such an obvious path that walks in between those two dichotomies. I don't see them as being dichotomous. To me, being strong and resilient and robust is part and parcel for aging well. Because if you look at the aging population today, they're frail. And frailty is something that we want to be able to identify and run in the opposite direction. In fact, there was a study that came out recently that found that among people who are at high genetic risk for developing Alzheimer's disease, frailty was the determining factor that determines one risk within that population between 0 and 3-fold.
How do you define frailty? Are you talking about like sarcopenia, like bone density loss kind of things like that?
Sarcopenia is obviously, like the disease state associated
like
with
loss of muscle tissue kind of thing?
Yeah. Well, being at risk for falling, for hip fractures,
okay.
not being, having reduced mobility. So that's, I think, the medical definition of frailty.
Yeah.
But
more of a fragile state overall.
Yeah.
I guess.
Yeah. Not very self-sufficient. I mean, when you look at the way they treat certain cancers in this, in the Western medicine paradigm, your success with a cancer treatment is determined by what's called your performance status, which is basically a measure of frailty.
Really?
Wow. Yeah. I know this because my mother, she actually had passed from pancreatic cancer, and her dementia had progressed so much over the prior 8 years that by the time she had developed this cancer, there was really nothing that medicine could do for her, because even though with somebody who had, with somebody without dementia, they would have probably tried radiation therapy,
right? Yeah.
Maybe even chemotherapy. But the success of those treatments is mediated by somebody's overall vigor, by somebody's overall robustness, by somebody's overall lack of frailty. But my mom at that point had been so frail, so her performance status was very low, which basically was like the treatment that implied that the treatment would do more harm than good. So your robustness as an organism determines so many things. And that's where I think that all the data on how important protein is, for example, and resistance training, crucially important. We have this sect now, vocal minority of the longevity community, and even certain longevity scientists that are promoting this notion that somehow like low protein diets are the key to living longer. But
is that because maybe they're assuming most protein is coming from animal sources with fat, i.e. more inflammation kind of things like that? Or?
That's part of it. But I think it's primarily the fact that protein stimulates growth pathways that can potentially promote, in a certain context, the growth of cancer cells. But that hasn't actually been borne out in any solid,
more just like correlation,
experimental way. Yeah, and also, that the so-called blue zones, which are, by the way, cherry-picked, these cherry-picked communities around the world that have people that are what are called super agers, so they live well into their 90s and
Dan
100s.
Butner, right?
Dan Buettner, I think it's like 5 of the blue zones, but I mean those are as cherry-picked as the 7 countries that Ansel Keys used in his 7 country studies back in the day.
What do you mean by cherry-picked? Like this blue zone only wanted to highlight these areas, so they just kind of they went looking for something and just found what they're looking for.
Yeah, there are other parts of the world that aren't part of the quote unquote group of blue zones where people live a very long time. And first of all, so there's 2 things. One, there's been this miscommunication about the diets and lifestyles of people in the blue zones.
Interesting.
People in the blue zones, actually, they don't eat low protein diets. They have lifestyles where they stay active up until old age. They've got these solid connections with their communities. They've got purpose in their life. And their diets are minimally processed. So right there, I mean, that's like that. There's a lot that's separating them from us. But also they eat meat. They definitely eat animal products. And so there's this misunderstanding about the diets of people in the blue zones, but then
probably animals that they're tending, right? So they have that whole other kind of connection to like the land, the community, the process, meaning
there's so many variables. One of the blue zones, for example, is in Loma Linda, California, the Seventh-day Adventists, right? They are vegetarians, but they don't smoke. They, like somebody who's really adhering to the
religious
morally
parameters.
appropriate religious parameters of that lifestyle. Yeah, they don't drink, they don't smoke. They're highly engaged with their community, right? And they're vegetarians. So, there's all these other variables at play. It would be impossible to ascribe the longevity that they experience to their diets. And in fact, California Mormons, they eat meat, unlike the Seventh-day Adventists, but they do a lot of the similar stuff. They don't drink, they don't smoke, and they have the same longevity. So saying that it's just the fact that they don't eat meat, to me, doesn't make a lot of sense. But then also those blue zones themselves, they're cherry-picked. There are other populations in the world that live just as long, if not longer, and they eat a lot of meat. Like in Hong Kong. Hong Kong is sort of a famous example. They eat tons of meat in Hong Kong, and it's one of the world's. They have, like, in terms of their population per capita, longest lifespans.
How come they didn't make the cut? They didn't want to highlight Hong Kong?
I don't know. You're going to have to ask Dan that. But it's, I think it's like in nutrition science, there's a lot of bias. And as much as that bias should be laid out up front, it's often obfuscated by personal agendas, activism, and the like. And I think that's really unfortunate. There's actually this, a lot of researchers have suggested that if you're going to write about nutrition and get it published in peer-reviewed literature, you should, you have to disclose your financial incentives, right? But
who's funding this? Who's
funding this? Who's supporting this? And by the way, that doesn't necessarily invalidate a study, the funding source, because still, if a paper is going to be published in a peer-reviewed journal, despite where the funding comes from, if it's sound data, it's sound data, right? But there's this call to disclose not just where your money comes from, but the kind of diet that you personally eat in nutrition science. And the reason for that, what makes it so unusual, is that, our diets we integrate our diets, unlike anything else, into our identity, into who we are. And when we find a diet that works for us, we want to proselytize it, right? We tie so much of who we are and our ethics and our morals into how we eat, that if you're writing a paper that seems to shun meat as a healthful food, but you yourself are a vegan, like, we as readers of that paper, we should know that that's your diet, because that might make us think differently about the objectivity of the review that you're
most likely going to have an inherent bias.
Yeah, exactly.
And to your point, I think that's a really interesting point that I hope the listener's picking up. Like, how much of your identity are you tying in consciously, subconsciously to your food choices?
Yeah.
Are you aligning belief system? Are you aligning just how you choose to live your day around a way of eating? Like, do you even fully understand that? Or is it trending? Is it cool? Did your neighbor get really interesting results that you kind of see yourself wanting as well? So how much of your identity is wrapped up in your diet? I think that's a question for people to kind of sit on for a little bit.
Yeah. And everybody has biases, right? Sure, I have biases, right? I enjoy steak. I enjoy steak. I also enjoy salads. I'm not ever going to be a carnivore, and I'm not ever going to be a vegan. Right. So in interpreting all of the information that I put out, you should say, oh, well, Max is an omnivore, right? Now, an omnivory to me should be the default, right? So I think that there's less of there should be less reason to have to defend an omnivorous diet, because it's the diet that humans have, that humans have had since we've been humans, right? There's no vegan hunter-gatherer community, certainly not one that exists today, but even in the historical record, humans were opportunistic. We were hunters. We would eat meat. We would eat plants. We would forage.
Whatever was available, because we had to. And that's why humans are so incredibly adaptable. That's why our digestive systems love meat and love plants, right? So omnivory to me is not the extreme fringe diet that needs to be defended. But of course, many in the, on social media will, especially from the more vocal vegan circles, will ask you to. But yeah, it's the extreme diets, it's the fringe diets that I think have the most burden of proof. Veganism, carnivory, like diets that like exclude all plant materials. And that's why I think, and also it's about hedging your bets, we don't freaking know. Like, I write about nutrition, but there are still so many more unanswered questions than there are answered questions. I mean, we're all going based on hypotheses. And I mean, the idea of personalized nutrition doesn't even exist yet for the most part. I mean, it's like we're starting to understand how people should eat according to their genes. But I mean, we're like just at the very tip of the iceberg. I agree. And I think what I'm hearing there is that there is kind of a universal semi-starting point for humans as to how we maybe could or should eat. But, at the end of the day, it really does need to be an N=1. Every human is different, right? So we can adopt certain truths that this food or this food group is most likely going to be a good start. Try it, figure it out. But ultimately, you need to learn how to listen to your body and ultimately figure out your own identity before latching onto a diet identity.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, it's the newer creations that I think warrant the greatest degree of skepticism, right? It's the ultra processed foods. It's the industrially refined grain and seed oils,
Right. Yeah.
that weren't around prior to 100 years ago. And today, some disgusting percentage of our calories comes from soybean oil today. Our consumption of soybean oil alone has increased by about 2,000% over the past 100 years.
Holy shit.
Yeah. So it's just, so those are the kinds of foods that I think warrant incredible skepticism, not skepticism over whether or not like meat has its place in a healthful diet, something that humans have been eating for millennia.
What about you brought up hunter-gatherer a couple of times, and one example comes to mind for me of, I think he actually had a name, but it was this hunter-gatherer guy frozen in a block of ice, and on his person, like a leather pouch kind of thing, he had a chaga.
Oh, interesting.
He was filmed somewhere, I think it was in like Siberia or something, which is
was it the Iceman or somebody else?
Is it? That's what's called the Iceman?
I mean, I know there was an Iceman. I don't know, but yeah,
this old. I'm Paleolithic, maybe even older, but on him he had, I think it was like a hunting spear of like a knife rock kind of thing.
Wow.
And what we now know to be the chaga mushroom.
That's
so
insane.
I know a lot of, like you're saying earlier, the things that you eat and recommend, we're kind of sacrificing maybe taste, or just they're quote weird, right? Functional mushrooms, adaptogens, we talked about herbs. What, in your experience, maybe in writing this book, did you find anything new that is a weird new food in your kitchen? Or did it come back to, you know what, these things might be weird, but damn it, they really help serve a purpose for humans?
Yeah, I mean, I love lion's mane. I'm super happy that now it's getting a little easier to find fresh lion's mane. If you haven't had fresh lion's mane, I mean, you're missing out. Have you had it?
Oh yeah, have you cooked it?
Yeah,
like a lion's mane steak.
Yeah.
Ooh.
Wait, I don't know if I've cooked it. I've made it. I've used like whatever I would season, for example, like fresh crab with, because the lion's mane fresh mushroom has that taste, right?
Yeah, and consistency as well a little bit. You pull it apart like crab meat.
It's so good. So I love that. I'm a huge fan of that. I've found at farmers markets around here fresh cordyceps, which I love raw, just to like pop into my mouth.
I was at a restaurant recently, and I, for the first time ever out to eat, had cordyceps on my dinner. You might appreciate this. It was a pan-seared, I think it was a filet or New York strip. So it was a grass-fed as well. And on the top, instead of like the typical like garlic butter aioli kind of thing, they were sauteed cordyceps.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Sounds amazing. I want to find out. Is that at a restaurant?
Conservatory over in West Hollywood.
Wow.
Yeah.
Damn.
Good steak. And I was like sold on the cordyceps too. So I love seeing that infused into culture now.
That sounds amazing. One tip for people that I didn't know going into the cookbook, but that I learned in researching, everything that I write about in regard to mushrooms, is that one cardinal mistake that many people make when they cook mushrooms is they rinse them before cooking them.
Right. Yeah. I used to make that mistake.
Yeah. You don't want to rinse your mushrooms. You just want to brush off any visible dirt or debris on them, and then you want to cook them dry. Because part of why cooked mushrooms are so delicious is their flavor gets concentrated. Mushrooms hang on to a lot of water, and when you rinse them first, you make them absorb even more water. They're like little sponges. So you don't want to rinse them. You just want to brush off any visible dirt, saute them in a high heat with some kind of fat, whether it's ghee. Ghee is great. Medium heat, I'll use extra virgin olive oil. It's fine to cook with. But yeah, I'm a huge fan of mushrooms.
Mushrooms. I asked you what are the fun things. We're only talking about mushrooms, so I'm going to make the assumption here.
Yeah,
we're team mushrooms, right?
Team mushrooms. Mushrooms are great. There have been a number of studies linking mushroom consumption with reduced risk of breast cancer, reduced risk of incident dementia. There was a Japanese study that found, I think it was about a 30% reduced risk of developing dementia for people who ate about 1 to 2 cups of mushrooms a week. So it's not even that much.
Just mushrooms in general, or like something like lion's mane?
No, any kind of mushroom. Kind of mushroom. Yeah, just mushrooms, fungi.
Like culinary mushroom, functional mushroom.
Yeah.
Any mushroom.
Yeah, any mushroom.
Wow, shit.
Mushrooms, they're loaded with beta glucans, which have an immunomodulatory effect. They're a good source of, depending on the mushroom, good source of different micronutrients. Some of them produce vitamin D, so you'll find vitamin D in certain mushrooms. But interestingly, one of the most powerful detoxifying compounds that we make in our own bodies is called glutathione.
Right, yeah.
And some mushrooms have been found to actually produce their own glutathione, with porcini mushrooms being the highest.
I love that you're here. That's why I love this platform, to have experts like you, because I talk about this stuff all the time. for years. And I feel like there's so many people that aren't hearing me when I say mushrooms are the future of nutrition.
They are.
They're the past, but also the future.
Yeah, they're so great. So yeah, porcini mushrooms loaded with glutathione and another antioxidant called ergothioneine, which is amazing. Like mushrooms aren't animals, they're not plants, they're their own kingdom. And they produce this incredible compound. So yeah, I mean, integrating a variety of mushrooms into your diet, I think really, really solid, nutritional foundation.
In your research for this book and just research in general over the years, because I think you would agree, nutrition in particular is a constantly evolving science. We're always studying. This was, quote, good for us today. It was bad for us yesterday. And there's always new science revealing itself. In your preparation, and I feel like every day you're probably just a scientist, looking up things. Are you finding that the practices you have, the rituals you have in the kitchen, your diet, are you on the ball, or are you finding actually that you need to modify things regularly, semi-regularly?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, we have like the ideal, like the template that I've set forth in my books, the view that I have on how to best eat to procure optimal health and to feel your best. And I would say that I abide by like the 80-20 or maybe even 90-10 rule, in that 90% of the time I'm sticking to that, and my principles haven't really changed. Like the science has really continued to evolve and strengthen the recommendations that I made 4 years ago in Genius Foods. But I still I'm human. I still I like wandering the aisles of the supermarket. As much as I say stay out of the aisles, like I wander the aisles and I'm always looking for like new cool products, because I like that. I like that producers of consumer packaged goods now are creating products that are a little bit healthier than they had been in the past. You're now seeing grain-free options of, for example, foods like pretzels, like bagged pretzels, which I growing up was a huge fan of.
Oh yeah.
Pretzel sticks. Because my mother loved them. Yeah, pretzel sticks. So now you can find like grain-free versions of pretzels. You can find chips like potato chips that aren't fried in crappy oils, but are fried in, for example, avocado oil.
Can I ask your opinion real quick on this?
Yeah.
Sorry to cut you off, but I know you talk a lot about processed foods versus unprocessed foods. And what we're seeing here is a better option, right?
Yeah.
CPGs are getting better and providing goods for people that are a step in the right direction. You feel comfortable with that? Like, hey, this, we're not on the outside of the perimeter, getting the vegetables and maybe pan frying them or baking them, but you're happy with a lot of the progress you're seeing in these types of alternatives?
I am. Yeah. I mean, for example, I don't routinely eat these, but so I can't believe that I'm about to defend a food like potato chips, but just
you heard it here first, everybody.
But just if you think about potato chips, right? In the past, they'd use whatever potatoes and they'd fry them in mystery oil that we'll just say vegetable oil, right? Which is soybean oil. And you don't know how many hours those fryers are using that oil, holding that oil at frying temperature, right? Which damages the oil, creates oxidative byproducts, certain aldehydes. Whereas avocado oil is much more chemically stable because it's predominantly monounsaturated fat. So the fact that potato chip manufacturers are now using that, which is a very healthful oil. Avocado oil is a very healthful oil. And potatoes are rich in potassium. So they're not like completely devoid of nutrients. They're not just pure starch. They're a good source of potassium. So, do I think like potato chips made in avocado oil are a health food? No, but they're definitely way better than they've been in the past.
Sure. Yeah.
Okay. Higher quality salts they're now using, fewer additives and stuff like that. So yeah, I do think that it's that we are making like incremental progress, even in the junk food category.
I would agree.
Yeah, which is great, because part of what it means to be human is to enjoy these kinds of things, right? Like to not overindulge, but to enjoy ice cream on occasion when you want to enjoy ice cream, right? Like ice cream is like arguably one of humanity's greatest creations.
It's the greatest,
right? Like you've got iPhones, you've got ice cream.
Have you been to, iPhones and salt and straw? I mean, come on.
Yeah, there you go. So, no, ice cream is not part of the recommendation that I make in Genius Foods or Genius Kitchen, although I do have an olive oil ice cream recipe in Genius Kitchen, which is bomb. But yeah, it's, it is something that inevitably we're going to indulge in, and rightfully so. It's delicious. We should. But the fact that we can now get healthier options, to me, is a great thing.
All right. So let's maybe take a step down in the future. You're building a Genius Kitchen. Like, the restaurant.
Yeah.
What does Genius Kitchen look like for you? What are you making? What are you preparing? What are you passing off to the cooks? Like, because I have to assume something, I'm making this up, by the way, but from start to finish, everything along the way is going to matter. So the environment, the connection people have, all the things we've been talking about here of what adds to longevity, what's in the kitchen, what is that ambiance like? Build us out in this Genius Kitchen.
Yeah, what does the Genius Kitchen look like? Well, for one, I mean, what comes to mind first is that it's a kitchen that minimizes plastic use. And not just because I'm like an environmentalist, which I care about the environment, but really I care about your health first and foremost. And we know that when you store wet, acidic, salty, hot foods in plastic, and particularly when you reheat those foods in plastic, you cause the leaching of some of these plasticizing compounds into your food. Also, when you reheat, for example, like fast food, like sandwiches that are wrapped in grease-proof paper, there's also a migration of these chemicals into your food.
Just transfers over.
Yeah, which is not good. Also, acidic foods can leach aluminum, which is not good. I'm not anti-aluminum foil. I think it serves a purpose in certain contexts, but for the most part, I prioritize using parchment paper in my cooking. It's chemically inert, and it's not going to leach, any like aluminum, for example, into your food.
Leach-free kitchen. That's always a plus. You can put that up on the billboard.
Yeah, leach-free
kitchen.
Yeah. So minimizing plastic, using aluminum foil, for example. Aluminum foil is not dangerous. I'm not saying that it's dangerous, but using it when when that's the right thing to use, but not using it, for example, to soak a citrus marinade in, like fish in a citrus marinade, because lemon juice, for example, is a powerful catalyst for leaching aluminum into your food.
Wow, I didn't know that. Okay.
Yeah. I have all these studies in Genius Kitchen, but there was a pretty shocking research finding out of Germany where they did that. Like they used real world test conditions where they marinated a piece of fish in lemon juice in aluminum foil, and they found that the amount that was leached in far surpassed the daily safe limit of aluminum.
Just consumption. In that one dish.
Yeah, just in that one dish.
In my mind, I'm going back to all the times where I would have maybe like a salmon or a piece of fish left over with a lemon rolled up in the foil. And
if you put it in a piece of glass and you put aluminum foil over it, that's fine.
Okay.
But if it's sitting in
directly on contact,
the acid with the aluminum, with the fish, you want to avoid that. So I think that's important. Minimizing plastic, again. Also, your cookware is important. So using things like cast iron pans instead of nonstick pans for the most part. Using a cast iron pan is great, especially for people who don't eat a lot of meat or premenopausal women. It's a great way of boosting the iron content of your food.
Yeah.
It distributes heat really evenly. It's a great tool to make steaks and burgers and stuff like that. So I'm a huge cast iron pan fan. And so, like minimizing exposure to environmental toxicants. I think that's above, what it is that you're actually cooking. I think that's something foundational that we want to get right. And then when it comes to the foods, optimizing for nutrient density. So making sure that the foods that you're eating are actually adding health to your body as opposed to taking it away. Our health is a choice that we make with every bite that we take. And when cooking foods like salmon, grass-fed beef, eggs, even poultry, like utilizing the whole animal. I think this is it just goes a great way to a long way towards making sure that your body is nutritionally replete, which most people are not. 90% of people are deficient in at least one essential nutrient, which handicaps your body in ways both visible and invisible.
Yeah.
So optimizing for that, I think, is really important. And then, just buying those highly nutrient dense foods that you find yourself enjoying and gravitating to on loop. There have been studies that have shown, the one that comes to mind was from Tufts University that found that this advice to eat all things in moderation actually just leads people to eating more confectionery products, more bakery products.
Because they're adopting it's just in moderation, right?
Right. Like that everything in moderation mantra that's pushed by the Dietetics Association, by the junk food industry, this idea that all foods fit. People that's one of the reasons why I take issue sometimes with like the fitness industry and the if it fits your macros, ethos, that people who adopt that tend to eat more unhealthy products, whereas healthier diets tend to focus on a narrower range of foods, but more healthful foods.
Because the other allows you to kind of get what you want, but still accomplish a goal, which is a whole other kind of conversation.
Yeah. I mean, you can lose weight eating Twinkies and ding dongs, right? Like there was a professor that actually proved this.
I was going to say, didn't somebody do that?
Yeah. Somebody did this, like some professor of something. I don't know. I forget. It made headlines, but went on a diet, lost a ton of fat utilizing just it was like the Twinkie diet to prove a point, right?
I think Jordan Syatt did the same thing. He did, I think for a week or maybe even a month, McDonald's, like every meal, every day was McDonald's, but he just did the, hit my calories kind of thing.
Yeah.
And his, I think goal was to actually lose weight, and he did. But of course, then he did like pre and post labs and everything was a shit show. So
was it? Wow.
Yeah. It's just like goal dependent. Clearly.
That's not surprising. What you eat matters. I mean, the calories definitely matter, but also the source of your calories matters as well in terms of your health, in terms of how you feel, in terms of your long-term aging prospects. So yeah, I'm definitely situated in the middle. Like calories matter, yes, but also the source of your calories as well.
What would you pass on to somebody right now listening? Let's pretend they're eating, hopefully eating very mindfully. What would you want to pass on to them right now to maybe have a conversation with that next bite, to look at their plate, look at their kitchen? What kind of mindfulness cue would you pass on to them to begin building out their genius kitchen right now?
Ooh, yeah, such a good question. Well, I think, people tend to feel that their health is especially with regard to their brains, and that the brain that they have, that they've inherited, is the brain that they're stuck with. But we now know, thanks to neuroplasticity, that you can change your brain over time. Exercise is a powerful way of doing that, of literally re-architecting the brain, causing the growth of new brain cells in some of the regions that matter most in the brain, like the hippocampus. But then also your diet and your lifestyle can affect the way that your brain functions as well, because the foods that you eat literally are what your brain uses to expand itself, to create healthy new brain cells. I mean, that's one of the reasons why omega-3 fatty acids are essential, right? You need to ingest omega-3 fatty acids because one omega-3 fatty acid in particular, docosahexaenoic acid, or DHA fat, is one of the most important structural building blocks of the brain. So if you're, not eating enough fatty fish, or you don't take a fish oil supplement, or, you're not getting others, you don't have a source of preformed omega-3 fats in your brain, there's a good chance in your diet, there's a good chance that you're starving your brain of the essential building blocks.
Oof.
And
there's something you don't hear every day.
Yeah. And so that's, I think, a big problem. I mean, I don't have the statistic on hand, but I mean, many people underconsume omega-3 fats.
Yeah. I could definitely go down another rabbit hole with you, but there's so much here with Genius Foods and Genius Life and now Genius Kitchen, just this whole aspect. I want to kind of bring it all home to what you're just talking about. That's the brain. We're talking about goals and identity and better options for your goals and your identity, and things that are maybe universally true for humans. But I would definitely jump on the brain health bandwagon with you, that if we can have that lens when building out our diet, when looking at the food choices we make, I think ultimately that would serve everybody's identity, everybody's goal for so many different options.
Yeah. I mean, one of the facts that I discovered, which really inspired me to step out of like the private life, so to speak, and start evangelizing this topic for people around the world, was
Thanks for doing that, by the way.
Yeah. I mean, I realized that Alzheimer's disease and other forms of dementia, and other neurodegenerative conditions, so not just dementia, but Parkinson's disease, for example, don't begin overnight. They begin years, if not decades, before the first presentation of symptoms. Take Parkinson's disease, for example. By the time you show up to the neurologist with your first symptom of Parkinson's disease, half of the neurons involved in movement in the substantia nigra, the dopamine-producing neurons in that tiny region of the brain that's affected by Parkinson's disease, are already dead by the time you show up with your first symptom to the neurologist's office.
Half.
Yeah, half.
Wow.
Alzheimer's disease begins in the brain 30 to 40 years before the first symptom of memory loss. So you could have oxidative stress, inflammation, amyloid buildup in your brain, all aggregating to form this disease phenotype that we call Alzheimer's disease, happening under the radar, unbeknownst to you, for years, if not decades. So that to me it made it very clear that this is an issue that younger people needed to be talking about, in particular millennials. So like our demographic, the oldest millennial is now 42 years old, which is like shocking. Shit. Yeah. But that to me, I mean, that it was very clear, right? Like if it takes 30 years to manifest, and my mom started showing her first symptom at 58, and I was 28 at the time, I was like, wow, this is like not an old person's disease at all. This is something that like I really need to be thinking about now that I have this risk factor, right? I could very easily, I mean, not easily, but I could very well develop what it is that my mom had. But I'm going to do everything in my power so that I lower my risk. And you know what? If I do anyway, then maybe it's, there's a luck component there, which there always is. Sure. But
and no one would argue, I think, that you're going to live a unpleasant life along the way. These are all things that serve the human experience. Yeah.
In accordance with the best available evidence, we know that we can slash our risk. And shit always happens, right? But while I'm alive, while I have agency, I'm going to arm myself with the best knowledge, the highest quality knowledge that I can find, thanks to, podcasts like yours, putting this information out there. And I'm going to act on that knowledge, because knowledge without action, knowledge isn't power in and of itself. It only becomes power once you act on that knowledge. And so knowledge is useless without it actually changing your behaviors. And so that's kind of what Genius Kitchen is actually all about. To bring it back to the book, it's about putting the rubber to the road in terms of, okay, I've identified all these foods, ingenious foods, which many people have been eating now for years, right? Because the book came out 4 years ago, changing their lives, which is so incredible to see. But Genius Kitchen makes it all practical, and talks about how to integrate these foods into dishes that are actually delicious, that are actually going to get your kids excited, for example.
That's amazing, man. Well, congratulations again on the new work, the new book. It's always a pleasure to have you back here.
Thank you, brother.
And I'll echo real quick just to say that knowing without doing is the same thing as not knowing. And if I could kind of wrap up what my life is about, is that it's, what do I need to do to become aware of what I'm already doing? What do I need to do to become aware of the things that I don't know? And then how can I appropriately, efficiently, and consistently act on them? That's kind of literally, I guess, just a fun new way of, of living a life ever forward. That's the mantra here, and that's what we're all about. And I want to ask you again, I don't know if I had this, to be honest, back in 2018, but what does ever forward mean to you, Max? How do you live a life ever forward?
Oh man, living ever forward. I mean, I love the name of this podcast so much. To me, it's just about doing a little bit better today than I did yesterday. Yesterday, maybe it took a while to convince myself to get to the gym, but maybe today it takes less convincing. Maybe yesterday I ate too close to bedtime and it disrupted my sleep. Maybe today I'm not going to eat for an hour or two before I go to sleep. Maybe I'm going to habit stack and I'm going to have, a glass of water before my morning coffee today, a good 8 to 16 ounces of water with electrolytes before I pound the morning Joe, right? So for me, it's about incremental steps and trying to be better than you were yesterday, not about being perfect, because perfect is an illusion, especially when it comes to our diets, our lifestyles. And we're imperfect beings. One of my favorite quotes is from Stephen Hawking. And it says, without imperfection, neither you nor I would exist. So imperfection is literally baked into who we are as a species, right? So it's not about perfection. It's just about doing the best you can.
Well said, man. There's never a right or wrong answer. And I'm curious, I'll have to go back and listen to see if I had that as part of the show in 18. I don't remember, but I'm always intrigued by people's difference of answers over the years.
Ever forward, brother.
Yeah.
We march ever forward.
Max, it's always a pleasure, like I said. Thank you so much, man.
Thanks, Jason.